So guys, we're back in the mine. Swinging our pickaxe from side to... Okay, I'm going to stop with this. Anyway, welcome back, guys, to the No Experiences podcast with me, Shivaya Gojo. Last time, I talked to you about consistency. And because I'm an inconsistent person, we're not going to talk about consistency today. Today, we're going to talk about characters. That's right. We're going to talk about how to make characters, how to develop characters, how to flesh out characters, and how to utilize characters. Because that's one thing that I feel like a lot of people don't understand nowadays. They have all these amazing characters with great potential, and they just use them in the stupidest goddamn way possible. It's like it's not that hard. So, let's just talk about characters for a while. Well, firstly, the point of a character is to progress a story. I've had so many times where I make a character that doesn't do anything to the story at all. Like, you could delete them from existence and the story would still be the same. An absolute pile of dog shit. But that's besides the point. The point is a character should do something that either progresses the story, that does something to change the story, or something that halts the story for a moment. Now, that one comes with some caveats, but obviously it still does something to the story, which a character should do. So whenever you create a character, you have to understand and ask, does this character do anything at all to my story? Like, if I got rid of this character, what will be different about my story? And when you ask that question of, did I get rid of this character, don't just be like, oh, I'll replace him with another character. No. Don't replace him with another character. Just straight up delete him. Delete him. What would happen? What would you get if you delete this guy out of existence? For example, if you deleted Einstein out of existence, I think a lot of this world would go to shit. You get what I mean? So ask yourself, if I delete this character, what would happen to the story? If the story ends up being the same, that character wasn't good. If the story ends up being terrible, that character was probably good. And if the story ends up being better, that character probably wasn't good. You get my point here. If a character does something important to the story, keep them. So how do we create characters that do something important to the story? Well, there's this beautiful thing that artists do, and it's called stealing. And no, I'm not joking about that. Pablo Picasso even said, good artists create, great artists steal. Frankly, I'm neither good or great, but I still steal regardless. The point is, mix and match a bunch of your favorite characters together. Don't just look at your favorite character and say, that's the guy I want to make into a story. I want to make a story about that. Because at that point, you didn't make a story. You just made a fan fiction. Like, if you look at Luffy and you go, I want a character like that, that's cool. But now if your character is some rogue, freedom-loving pirate who wears a straw hat and has zero sense of core nobility, you did not make a new character, you just made Luffy, except without his friends. What you can do instead is take some traits of Luffy and then combine them with other traits that other characters have. Maybe he has this fun freedom spark that Luffy has, but he also has this more mature tone to him, like some characters in Bleach do. Perfectly understandable. Or maybe he's a fusion of Luffy's fun, joyous personality, but because of that, he's also someone who has a darker past that he's hiding behind this fun smile. Luffy doesn't have that dark of a past. He has a dark storyline, sure, maybe you can debate that, but he doesn't have that dark of a past, apart from losing Sabo. Spoilers, this is not a One Piece podcast. The point is, don't just take Luffy and make a character from him. Take a bunch of your favorite characters and combine them. For example, in my story, I have a character that's inspired by Gojo from Jujutsu Kaisen, but he takes in elements from Bleach and he takes in elements from other fantasy genres that help create his personality. Obviously, the inspiration is still there, and you can obviously pay homage to other characters that you took inspiration from, but try to make them unique. The second thing is, how do you even place a character in a story and make him work? The first thing you can do is place a character in a backstory. Have him be the root cause of everything. He's the switch flipper. Everything in the story happens because he did something in the past. Without him, the story wouldn't even happen. So, hell, I think that makes him important. The second way you can do it is by, well, having him be the main character. That's the cheap way to do it. The third way you can do it is having him be responsible for a pivotal plot point. When you plan out your story, think of moments that possibly could be plot twists. They don't have to be grand plot twists like AOT type stuff. They don't have to completely be the cliche of this guy was a traitor all along, or turns out we've been fighting the wrong side. It could be something very plot twist, such as the situation is bigger than it seems. The characters are fighting a much stronger enemy than anticipated. Well, have one of your characters be the introduction to that. Maybe it's someone who works under that bigger villain, or maybe it's someone who serves to remind the character that, hey, you're the main character, but guess what? You're not all that strong right now. You see you right now? You're bleeding on the ground. Your arm is missing. You have no friends. You are not beating the main villain. That could serve as a pivotal point in the character's development, and you utilize one character to help improve another character. Therefore, you created two really great characters. So you have your character, you have the inspiration for them, you have how to place them. Now, how do you flesh out your character? Well, there's a lot of ways to do this. The easiest way that I think every writer loves to do is drama. I'll say it once more. The easiest way that every writer likes to flesh out their characters with is drama. Okay, trauma is the greatest way to flesh out your characters. Sounds sadistic as heck to say that, but trust me, it really is. Have your characters go through some dark shit in the story, and they will come out better than ever. Because with trauma, there's so many storylines you can take with this. You can take down a heroic storyline where the character overcomes this trauma and ends up sticking to his morals. You can have a storyline where the character falls victim of his traumas and he completely changes as a person. His morals are all shifted, and he's not someone who views the same world with his rose-tinted glasses anymore. You could have a character fall down the path of villainy where he realizes, hey, this world is pretty fucking crap. I don't want to support this anymore. You could have a character fall to the likes of trauma and give up. He says, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Life sucks. I don't want to live it. There are so many possibilities you can have with trauma, and you can use this to basically create any type of character in the world. Another way you can do this is with something called pressure. Put pressure on your character. Have plot points that rapidly increase the stakes every single time. Start off small. I think a lot of people struggle with increasing the stakes because their opening is like aliens are invading Earth. You have 10 minutes to defeat them all and save mankind, and then it's like 10 chapters later, and it's like, so you gotta fight this bank robber, and it's like, dude, I just defeated Elon Musk's kid. What do you mean I gotta capture a bank robber? This is light work. So you have to always step up the stakes, and I would always recommend starting small. You want to start with a big explosion to start off your story. That's perfect, but you have to remember where it goes from there. You have to keep thinking of bigger and bigger stakes to go from that point onwards. Now, another very rare way you can create fleshed out, very in-depth characters is to utilize the stories of other characters. Usually a character's backstory is simply for their development only, but you can use another character's development to flesh out another character. For example, in my book, The Human Art of Film, the main character, Andrea, is a very aspiring director. She's very proud of her abilities as a director, but she has the fear of taking the next step because even though she loves her work and is very proudful of it, she doesn't believe she has the qualifications to go out and make a movie. She doesn't think she's ready enough. Now comes her roommate, Nico, who has the pressure from her parents to be a doctor, even though she has zero interest in it and she wants to be an actor instead. Her parents won't support her dream, and because of that, she's afraid to fight back against her parents. Now, both characters, Andrea and Nico, are afraid of something, and both of them help each other get over that fear by knowing each other's storyline. Andrea knows that Nico is afraid of acting, and she helps push Nico to fight against what her parents have pressured onto her and to pursue her dreams of acting. But by doing that, Nico in turn helps Andrea fight back her fear of not being good enough and not living up to expectations, because those two characters have gone through very similar storylines, and obviously they can relate to one another. So by using Nico's storyline, we helped flesh out Andrea's fears, her backstory, and her motivation in the world, while we used Andrea's backstory to flesh out and push Nico's development in the story. So this is a great example of using character's backstory to help another character. Don't just simply have a backstory for the characters itself. A lot of times when we see a backstory, it's in the form of a flashback, and most of the time, these flashbacks aren't like explanations. Like, a character isn't talking to another character and explaining them their story. That happens sometimes, but most of the time, that's not the case. So it really just feels like the main character or whatever character is having a flashback is just, having a dream, reminiscing on their past, and they don't ever tell anybody. So when you do that, you're kind of limited because you can't use that backstory to relate or flesh out to another character because, it's something that a character keeps secret. And oftentimes, that's the right way to keep it. We don't often just reveal our full life story from time to time. I mean, even with close friends, you don't often just tell them from start to finish everything in your life that's happening or has happened. Obviously, you tell them, you update them day to day, but you don't obviously tell them the full story. But you have to understand, novels are generally a different medium. The way we talk in films, novels, and TV shows is a more practiced speech. I mean, no one speaks perfectly. Like, you've probably heard me stutter like 18,000 times already at this point. No one speaks perfectly in real life, yet movies that are trying to emulate real life, they do. And that's the point. Their speech and style of speech in movies isn't exactly down to real life. So why should everything be mimicking real life? The point is, what the quote I made once was, if you want to reach the trees of fiction to the heavens, you have to plunge the roots of reality to hell. And you can't have one or the other. You can't have just the roots and then no fiction on top of it, because that's a dead tree. And you can't just have fiction because, a tree can't survive without its roots, now can it? So you have to have both. You ground yourself in reality, but there's so much fiction that's happening. So don't be afraid to do things that don't normally happen in real life in fiction, because that's the point of fiction. I mean, make stuff up. The next way you can come up with character inspiration is appearance. Honestly, this is something that's super easy to do in like fantasy or fantasy stories, or stories that have like superpowers, like mystical, supernatural elements. This is like the easiest thing to do. And I'm going to give you a step-by-step. This is what you do, okay? You open up Google or DuckDuckGo if you still use that, or Bing. If you use Bing, please don't watch this podcast. Like, genuinely, I have no respect for you if you use Bing. Open up your favorite search engine. Go on Pinterest.com. Cool, you're on Pinterest.com. You don't have an account? Why don't you have an account? If you don't have an account, make an account, okay? Pinterest will literally be your lifesaver. All right, you have an account now? Cool. Okay, now that you have an account, we're going to go on Pinterest and we're going to search for some inspiration. Let's say your thing is a dark academia style story. Search up dark academia style art. You search through it and you find a really cool piece of art. And you notice this cool piece of art that the guy you see in the art has a scar on him. It's like, oh, that's cool. What can you do now? Use that scar to flesh out the characters. How did he get that scar? For what reason did he get that scar? Does the scar still affect him today? Is there some sadder backstory to this scar? Maybe he got it from being abused, or is there a victorious aspect to this scar? Was he a soldier and he fought a valiant battle and he prevailed, and the scar is a reminder of his victories? There's so many things you can do with his appearance. Or maybe your character has an unnatural hair color. For example, in the current novel I'm writing, main character has white hair, and that's not typically normal, because all the other characters have blonde, black, brown, regular natural shades of hair, but he has white hair that makes him stand out. So not only do I use that as a pivotal point in his characters, as people point that out in the stories, like, hey, you have white hair, I also use that to describe him and have something in his backstory that explains how he got his white hair. I'm not going to spoil it to you because the book isn't written, but let's just say there is a very important reason that ties back to the premise of the story as to why he has white hair. And something like that, like what color hair he is, sounds like a very normal, boring thing. Like, why would that be so important to the plot? But you can make it important to the plot. The beauty about writing is you can make anything important to the plot. It could be a bottle of fucking water, okay? Blue label that says, please recycle after use. It's got 0 calories, somehow has 46 grams of sugar. Doesn't matter what it is. You could make that important to the story. For example, character who grew up poor, that was the only water bottle they could afford. That's the only water they could have. They didn't have tap water because the utility bill was so high, and every other bottle of water was so expensive. That was the only water bottle they ended up drinking. And so now, even at the ripe age of 47, they still drink that bottle because that's just something they were used to. That's something they grew up on. See how I made a water bottle relevant to a character's story? You can do that too. So this is what I'm going to advise you to practice. Go in your house, take one of your fictional characters you've made, right? Go in your house and find a random object and try to make that random object relevant to your character, okay? Like, let's say I'm at my desk. I see a wallet, okay? Make a wallet important to him. Maybe the character, he didn't grow up with a lot of money, and so he never had a wallet to keep his cash around. So now, wherever he goes, he treasures his wallet. He doesn't want to lose it. He's constantly checking his pockets to make sure his wallet's there. He's always opening the flaps to see, are my credit cards still there? Is my cash still there? You do that and practice with these random items, and I'll guarantee you, these small things will help flesh out the characters more. Because a lot of writers can create stories on a big scale. I mean, just take a look at Book Talk. I mean, Book Talk does that a lot. They make this grand storylines of big synopsis, big character designs. They have all these cool templates. So in terms of description, people have that locked down. And even if you don't, trust me, that's a lot easier said than done. Because like I said back with my first tip, mix and match your favorite characters together. If you can't come up with something new, take things scramble them together, saw them like Frankenstein, and boom, you got a new character, right? So that's something that a lot of writers have down. But something they don't have is the small details that help take the story a long way through. This is a ridiculously stupid tip I'm about to give you. I don't know whether it'll work for you, but it has worked for me. If you ever watch those YouTube videos where these people make video essays on films and they break down like the color of a shirt somebody's wearing in a film and why that's relevant to the story and how it progresses the plot with like symbolism and stuff. Try to imagine that your novel, your story, your film, your short project, whatever it is already made, okay? Imagine it's already made. Have the picture in your head, and imagine one of these people is making a video essay on your project. And they're looking at the small things your character does and explaining how symbolic it is, how important it is, and how it affects the story. And when you do that, ideas will come to you on what objects can you make relevant to your character, what parts of him can you make it relevant to your character. It doesn't have to be like physical parts. Like, it doesn't have to be the scar I mentioned or the hair color. It could be parts of his personality. It could be certain actions he does. Maybe, he walks and sits in a different way. Those small things can be relevant if you are willing to put in the work and make them relevant. That's the ultimate tip here. Are you willing to make something relevant in a character's description? And when you do that, you will notice how much more nuanced a character becomes. So that tip of pretend like your product is finished and somebody is basically giving a film review, like a letterboxd review of it. Think about what they might say in a letterboxd review, because that might help you flesh out your characters. Now, one of the final tips I can give for creating a character is speech and tone. A lot of times, this is especially with novels, okay? This is maybe not so with films, because a lot of times films, we know that somebody's going to act this or somebody's going to say this line. But in film, we forget that even though these are just words on a piece of paper, to somebody they could be a story. Some people read their book out loud. They read the lines out loud. Some people even act the scenes out loud, you know? So try to find a distinct voice in a character. What are their mannerisms? How do they talk? Are there certain phrases they say that are unique to them? Is there a certain style of talking they do? Is, maybe, a character is unique because he has this, dumb accent on him that people use all the time. These small things all help to bring nuance to your character, but on top of the nuance, they can help flesh out a bigger part of your character. Maybe a character speaks broken English. Why? Because I can name two reasons why. Maybe they never learned English. They were illiterate for a long time of their lives. And boom, right then and there, you've got something big you can make your character about. You can figure out, hey, why was he illiterate? Maybe he grew up in tougher circumstances. Okay, what tougher circumstances? Okay, maybe the city he grew up in was ravaged with war, and so the first thing he knew how to do was survive and fight, not read down and write something, right? Boom! Just because of that small tidbit of, oh, he speaks in very broken English, you created a bigger backstory about him. Or maybe he speaks broken English because his vocal throats are injured. He knows English in his head, but he can't speak it properly because of his damaged throat. Okay, now you're thinking, why is his throat damaged? Why can't he talk? From there, those bigger ideas comes. So a lot of people think that, I got to come up with the bigger ideas first, then I'll come up with the smaller details. But to me, I feel like you can come up with a smaller detail first and then get a bigger idea. I mentioned in the previous episode of how you can take a scene and create a whole story around that scene. And I told you to try practicing by taking a scene from a movie you've never watched, analyze it, and then, you don't have to write it, but just in your head think about a full movie, the whole plot you can come up with around that scene. What stories can you come up with? And you have to understand that in that perspective, a scene compared to a whole movie, one scene is a smaller detail compared to the big idea of a movie. Like, if IMDb is describing a movie, they're not putting a scene in the description. They're putting a synopsis, which is like 2 sentences. So try to do the same thing with your characters. Try to think of these small things about your characters that seem, irrelevant at first. But the moment you start thinking about them and you start noticing, what can I do with them? You start asking the question of why. Once you start asking that question about your characters, you'll notice that those small things become bigger, relevant ideas. And then those bigger, relevant ideas can be connected to the premise of the story, and they can help form the story. Sometimes, I create a whole story based off a character. I mentioned in the previous episode that I wrote a script in 10 days. The idea of the story didn't come first, actually. Even though the inspiration of that song came first, the full-fledged story came when I thought of the main character. And when I started thinking about the main character, I formed the whole story around that main character. But I couldn't form the story if I didn't create the character. And I couldn't create the character when I thought about the smaller individual parts of that character. For example, something as dumb as the character doesn't like smoking heavily, right? That ended up becoming a very relevant part to his character because it helped form his interaction with his best friend who developed a habit of smoking after a tough day. And, it's kind of bothering him, so he goes out of his way to prevent his character from his best friend from developing this addicting smoking habit, which is bad for his health. So when I thought about that, That small idea became a bigger idea. That bigger idea became the character, and the character became the storyline. So just do that. Start with your characters, and start with the smaller things. Like I said, go on Pinterest. You have an idea for a story. You know the rough themes about it. Okay, search that up in the search bar. Find some pictures and look at the pictures and analyze them and think, okay, what can I do with this? What can I do with this storyline? What can I do with this character's eyes, with his hair, with his face? What can I do with all of that and create a bigger, better story? And once you do that, I will guarantee you will have some pretty darn good characters. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. Again, I just wanted to say that if you don't like me yapping, get the hell out of this podcast, because there is no script for this podcast. It is just me in front of a computer with a microphone talking. I'm saying the first things that come up to my mind. Sure, there's something rehearsed in the back of my mind saying, okay, probably going to mention this point, and I'm probably going to mention that point, but I don't rehearse a full-on script. So, if you like my style of content here, that's dope. Consider supporting me, not just by subscribing to this channel, but supporting my stories. Of course, I'm a story writer, which is why I'm helping other people write stories. And I have a published novel called The Human Art of Film. Please check that out. It's on Amazon. It's $9.99. I think that's pretty big bargain for a book of that many pages. But regardless, teach this on. You don't want to buy the book, that's fine. But I would heavily recommend it to you. If you like the Dead Poet Society, you'll like the book. But more importantly, that you can write a story too. Okay, if little old me can write a story, you can. Okay, because I'm not that big of a writer. Okay, I only have 4 books I've sold, and all 4 of them are my friends. So, I'm just saying, if little old me can write a book, you can too. So this is Shivaya Gojo on the No Experiences podcast, and I'll see y'all later.